The train whistle pierced the quiet Montana afternoon as Tabitha Morgan clutched her worn leather suitcase with trembling fingers, her heart hammering against her ribs. The year was 1879, and she had traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she'd never met, a cattle rancher who had advertised for a bride in the Eastern newspapers. The correspondence had been brief but promising. Now, standing on the platform of Silver Creek's modest train station, she tried to ignore the knot of dread in her stomach. "Last stop, Silver Creek," the conductor called, helping Tabitha down the steps. She stood awkwardly on the platform, adjusting her plain gray traveling dress. Unlike the other women who had disembarked, most visiting relatives or returning home, Tabitha wore no decorative hat or fashionable bustle. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and her face, which had never known cosmetics, revealed every freckle and imperfection that had haunted her since childhood. The platform gradually emptied until only Tabitha remained, scanning the faces of those who had come to meet the train. No one approached her. After 30 minutes of waiting, a portly man in a suit too tight for his frame walked toward her. "Miss Morgan?" he asked, consulting a piece of paper. "Tabitha Morgan." "Yes, that's me," she said, relief washing over her. "Are you Mr. Crawford?" The man's eyebrows shot up and he laughed not kindly. "Heavens, no. I'm Milton Perkins, the town clerk. Mr. Crawford asked me to meet you and—" His eyes traveled over her face, lingering on her prominent nose and the scar above her right eyebrow, a souvenir from a childhood accident. "Is something wrong?" Tabitha asked, though she knew. She had seen that look countless times before. "No, no," Mr. Perkins said unconvincingly. "Let's get you to Mr. Crawford's house. He's expecting you." The ride through town in Mr. Perkins' buggy was quiet and uncomfortable. Tabitha tried to distract herself by taking in the sights of Silver Creek, the general store, the saloon, the small church at the end of the main street. It was larger than she had expected, but still tiny compared to Boston. They pulled up to a grand 2-story house on the edge of town. Tabitha's spirits lifted slightly. Perhaps this new life wouldn't be so bad after all. Mr. Crawford was waiting on the porch. He was a handsome man in his 40s, with a well-trimmed beard and expensive clothes. His face, however, fell visibly when Tabitha stepped down from the buggy. "Mr. Crawford," Mr. Perkins called. "I've brought Miss Morgan as requested." Mr. Crawford came down the steps slowly, his eyes fixed on Tabitha with growing dismay. "This is Miss Morgan?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Tabitha said, extending her hand. "I'm pleased to finally meet you." Crawford ignored her outstretched hand. "There must be some mistake," he said, turning to Perkins. "This cannot be the woman who sent me that letter." Tabitha's face burned with humiliation. "I assure you, Mr. Crawford, I am Tabitha Morgan. We've been corresponding for 3 months." "You sent me a photograph," Crawford accused. "My cousin's photograph," Tabitha admitted quietly. "I explained in my last letter that I had no recent portrait of myself." "I received no such letter," Crawford said coldly. He turned to Perkins. "Take her to the hotel. I'll pay for 1 night. After that, she'll have to make other arrangements." "But Mr. Crawford," Tabitha began. "I advertised for a wife, Miss Morgan, not a—" He stopped himself, but his meaning was clear. "I'm sorry you've come all this way for nothing." Before Tabitha could respond, Crawford went back inside his house and slammed the door. The hotel was little more than a boarding house with a saloon on the first floor. Mr. Perkins left her there with an awkward tip of his hat and a mumbled apology. The innkeeper, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Halloway, showed her to a small room on the second floor. 1 night, Mrs. Halloway emphasized. Mr. Crawford paid for 1 night. Alone in the sparsely furnished room, Tabitha finally allowed herself to cry. She had spent nearly all her savings on the train ticket, believing that Mr. Crawford's promises of a fresh start were genuine. Now she was stranded in a strange town with little money and no prospects. The next morning, Tabitha washed her face and tried to gather her courage. She needed work and a place to stay. Surely there was something she could do in Silver Creek. In Boston, she had worked as a seamstress and occasionally as a bookkeeper for a small dress shop. Perhaps those skills would be valuable here. She went downstairs to the hotel's small dining room for breakfast, keenly aware of the stares from the other guests. Word had already spread about the mail-order bride who was too ugly for Victor Crawford. After a meager breakfast, Tabitha approached Mrs. Halloway. "Might I ask if you know of any work available in town? I'm skilled with a needle and have experience keeping accounts." Mrs. Halloway's expression softened slightly. "You might try the general store. Mr. Peterson sometimes needs help with his books, and Mrs. Wilson at the dress shop might have sewing work." "Thank you," Tabitha said gratefully. Her hopes were quickly dashed. Mr. Peterson had just hired a young man to manage his accounts, and Mrs. Wilson took one look at Tabitha and claimed she had no work available, though the stack of unfinished dresses visible through the back doorway suggested otherwise. By mid-afternoon, Tabitha had been turned away from every business in Silver Creek. She sat on a bench outside the general store, fighting back tears and wondering if she had enough money for a train ticket back east, and what would await her there if she returned in disgrace. "Excuse me, miss," a deep voice said. "Are you all right?" Tabitha looked up to see a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: denim trousers, a faded shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded piercing blue eyes. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw covered in stubble and laugh lines around his eyes. "I'm fine, thank you," Tabitha said, quickly wiping her eyes. The man didn't move. "You don't look fine," he said bluntly. "You look like someone who's had a rough day." Despite herself, Tabitha smiled slightly. "Is it that obvious? I'm Owen Reed," he said, tipping his hat. "I run the Double R Ranch outside of town." "Tabitha Morgan," she replied. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "You're Crawford's mail-order bride." Tabitha's smile vanished. "Word travels fast in Silver Creek." "It's a small town," Owen said, sitting beside her on the bench without invitation. "Crawford's a fool." The unexpected comment startled her. "I beg your pardon, Crawford," Owen repeated. "He's a fool, always has been. Cares more about appearances than substance." He glanced at her. "No offense meant." "None taken," Tabitha said, though she wasn't entirely sure what he meant. "Mr. Crawford made his feelings quite clear." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "You need work." "Yes," Tabitha admitted, "and a place to stay." "Mrs. Halloway made it clear I need to be out of the hotel by sundown." "I need help at my ranch," Owen said. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Davenport, is getting on in years and could use an extra pair of hands. Plus, I've got a mess of ranch accounts that need sorting. Can you cook?" "Yes," Tabitha said cautiously. "And I'm good with numbers. I kept books for a dress shop in Boston." "Perfect," Owen said, standing. "The job comes with room and board. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. Mrs. Davenport will see to that." Tabitha stared at him, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Owen's face grew serious. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be judged unfairly." He extended his hand. "What do you say, Miss Morgan? Would you like to come work at the Double R?" Tabitha hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. "Yes, Mr. Reed, I would." Owen helped Tabitha gather her few belongings from the hotel. Mrs. Halloway seemed surprised but not displeased by this turn of events. "The Double R is a respectable place," she told Tabitha as they were leaving. Reed runs a tight ship, and Mrs. Davenport is a good Christian woman. You could do worse." Owen's wagon was loaded with supplies from the general store. He helped Tabitha up onto the seat and climbed up beside her. "It's about 5 miles to the ranch," he explained as they set off. Not far, but far enough to feel away from town. As they traveled, the landscape opened up before them, rolling hills covered in spring grass, distant mountains with snow still on their peaks, and wide open sky that seemed to stretch forever. "It's beautiful," Tabitha said, breathing deeply of the clean, sage-scented air. Owen glanced at her, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Most Easterners take some time to appreciate it. They're used to trees and buildings blocking the view." "In Boston, I lived in a tenement with one small window that looked out at another brick wall," Tabitha said. "This is," she gestured at the landscape, "this feels like freedom." Owen's smile grew wider. "That's exactly what it is." The Double R Ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs, a large barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and several horses milled about in a corral near the barn. "It's not much compared to Crawford's place," Owen said as they approached, "but it's home." "It's wonderful," Tabitha said sincerely. As Owen pulled the wagon up to the house, an older woman emerged onto the porch. She was small and wiry, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "What have you brought home this time?" "Owen Reed," she called, hands on her hips. "Mrs. Davenport, this is Miss Tabitha Morgan," Owen said as he helped Tabitha down from the wagon. "She's going to help you with the house and help me with the books." Mrs. Davenport looked Tabitha up and down with a critical eye. Tabitha braced herself for the familiar judgment, but the older woman's face suddenly broke into a warm smile. "Well, thank the Lord," she said. "I've been telling him for years I need help, but does he listen? Of course not. Men never do. Come inside, dear. You must be exhausted." The inside of the ranch house was surprisingly spacious and well appointed. The furniture was solid and practical, but there were touches of comfort, colorful quilts, a few small paintings on the walls, and shelves of books that immediately caught Tabitha's eye. "Owen loves his books," Mrs. Davenport explained, following Tabitha's gaze. "Reads everything he can get his hands on. Now, let me show you to your room. It's not large, but it's comfortable." The bedroom was at the back of the house, with a window that looked out over the hills. It had a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, and a washstand with a pitcher and bowl. "This is perfect," Tabitha said, setting her suitcase on the bed. Mrs. Davenport nodded approvingly. "Get yourself settled, then come to the kitchen. I'll show you what needs doing." Over the next few days, Tabitha settled into life at the Double R. She helped Mrs. Davenport with the cooking and cleaning, and in the evenings, she worked on organizing Owen's accounts. The ranch was successful but busy, with half a dozen cowboys working the cattle and Owen overseeing everything. Despite his responsibilities, Owen made time each evening to check on Tabitha's progress with the books. He was intelligent and quick to understand her explanations of the new organizational system she was implementing. "You have a real talent for this," he told her one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, ledgers spread out before them. "These books haven't been this clear in years." "Thank you," Tabitha said, pleased by the praise. "It's satisfying work." Owen studied her for a moment. "Are you happy here, Tabitha? I know it's not what you came west for." Tabitha considered the question. "I came west for a new beginning," she said finally. "This isn't the one I expected, but perhaps it's the one I needed." A week turned into 2, and Tabitha found herself feeling more at home at the Double R than she ever had in Boston. The work was hard but satisfying, and both Owen and Mrs. Davenport treated her with respect. The cowboys were polite, if a bit shy around her, and no one mentioned her appearance. One evening, as Tabitha was hanging laundry in the yard, she noticed Owen watching her from the corral where he was working with a young horse. "You ride, Tabitha," he called. "No," she admitted. "I've never had the opportunity." Owen opened the gate and led the horse over to her. It was a beautiful mare with a gleaming chestnut coat. "This is Penny," he said. "She's gentle as a lamb. Would you like to learn?" Tabitha hesitated. "I wouldn't know how." "I'll teach you," Owen said. "Every Montanan should know how to ride." The next day, after the morning chores were done, Owen brought Penny, saddled and ready, to the house. "Mrs. Davenport says you can have the afternoon off," he told Tabitha. "Time for your first riding lesson." Tabitha was nervous but excited. Owen was a patient teacher, showing her how to mount, how to hold the reins, and how to sit in the saddle. "The secret is to move with the horse, not against it," he explained, leading Penny in a slow circle. "Let your body relax." By the end of the lesson, Tabitha was riding on her own, albeit at a walk. The feeling of being on horseback, moving in harmony with such a powerful creature, was exhilarating. "You're a natural," Owen said as he helped her dismount. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Tabitha looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Thank you for teaching me," she said softly. Owen's eyes held hers for a long moment. "You're welcome," he finally said, stepping back. Same time tomorrow, the riding lessons became a daily ritual, weather permitting. Tabitha's confidence grew, and soon she was trotting and even cantering across the meadows surrounding the ranch. These afternoons with Owen were the highlight of her days, and she found herself looking forward to them with increasing anticipation. It wasn't just the riding she enjoyed, it was Owen's company. He was different from the men she had known in Boston. He spoke his mind but was never cruel. He worked harder than any of his men but never boasted about it, and he treated her with a respect she had rarely experienced. One sunny afternoon, they rode to a small stream that cut through the ranch property. Owen spread a blanket on the grass, and they sat eating the lunch Mrs. Davenport had packed. "Tell me about Boston," Owen said, leaning back on his elbows. "What was your life like there?" Tabitha hesitated, unsure how much to share. "It was difficult," she finally said. "My parents died when I was 16. I lived with an aunt for a few years, then on my own. I worked as a seamstress and bookkeeper." "No suitors?" Owen asked casually. Tabitha laughed without humor. "Look at me, Owen. Men like Victor Crawford are not the exception, they're the rule. I've been told all my life that I'm too plain, too tall, too serious, too everything that a woman shouldn't be." Owen sat up, his expression suddenly intense. "The men in Boston must be blind as well as stupid." Tabitha blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Owen said deliberately, "that when I look at you, I don't see plain or tall or serious. I see a woman who's smart and strong and capable. I see the way your eyes light up when you're happy and how your whole face changes when you laugh." Tabitha's heart began to race. "Owen, let me finish," he said gently. "I see the freckles across your nose that you try to hide. I see the scar above your eyebrow that tells me you've lived a real life. I see your hands with the little calluses from your needle and pen. And I think all of it is beautiful." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this. "You don't have to say these things," she whispered. Owen reached out and took her hand. "I'm not saying them because I have to. I'm saying them because they're true." Before Tabitha could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats interrupted the moment. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Billy, came galloping toward them. "Mr. Reed," he called, reining in his horse. "There's trouble at the north pasture. Some of Crawford's men are driving their cattle onto our grazing land." Owen's expression hardened. He stood and helped Tabitha to her feet. "We'll have to continue this conversation later," he said quietly. "Will you be all right riding back to the house on your own?" "Of course," Tabitha assured him, though she was disappointed by the interruption. Owen mounted his horse. "Tell Mrs. Davenport I might be late for supper," he said, then galloped off with Billy. Tabitha rode back to the ranch house, her mind whirling with Owen's words. Could he truly find her beautiful? The idea seemed impossible, yet the sincerity in his eyes had been unmistakable. Mrs. Davenport was in the kitchen when Tabitha returned. The older woman took one look at her flushed face and smiled knowingly. "Had a nice ride with Owen, did you?" she asked, rolling out dough for a pie. "Yes," Tabitha said, hanging her hat on a peg by the door, "until we were interrupted. There's some trouble with Mr. Crawford's men." Mrs. Davenport snorted. "That man has been trying to push Owen off this land for years. Thinks the double R should be his." "Why?" Tabitha asked, washing her hands at the sink. "Greed, pure and simple," Mrs. Davenport said. "The double R has the best water access in the county. Crawford wants it, but Owen won't sell." She glanced at Tabitha. "Crawford's not used to being denied what he wants." Tabitha thought of Crawford's cold dismissal at the train station. "No, he's not." "Owen's a good man," Mrs. Davenport continued, her tone casual but her eyes shrewd. "He deserves someone who sees that." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Davenport, call me Margaret," the older woman interrupted. "And don't worry, I'm not one to meddle. Much," she winked. "Now help me with this pie. If the men are dealing with Crawford's troublemakers, they'll be hungry when they get back." It was well after dark when Owen and the ranch hands returned. They were tired and dusty, but in good spirits. "Crawford's men backed down when they saw we weren't going to be intimidated," Owen explained as he washed up for dinner. "They won't try that again soon." The meal was lively, with the men recounting the confrontation and praising Owen's handling of the situation. Tabitha watched him from across the table, admiring the easy authority he had with his men and the way he deflected their praise. After dinner, the hands retired to the bunkhouse, and Mrs. Davenport announced she was going to bed. "These old bones need their rest," she said, leaving Tabitha and Owen alone in the kitchen. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Owen stood and walked to the cupboard, returning with a bottle and 2 glasses. "Apple brandy," he explained, pouring a small amount into each glass. "Mrs. Davenport makes it from our orchard, best in the territory." Tabitha accepted the glass, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Thank you." They sipped in silence for a moment, the brandy warming Tabitha from the inside out. "About what I said earlier," Owen finally began. "I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," Tabitha assured him. I'm not used to anyone seeing me that way." Owen set his glass down and leaned forward. "How do you see yourself, Tabitha?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know," she admitted. "For so long I've seen myself through others' eyes, the plain girl, the one no one chooses." "Then maybe it's time to see yourself differently," Owen suggested. "Because the woman I see is remarkable." Tabitha met his gaze, searching for any sign of insincerity. She found none. "Why me, Owen? You could have any woman in the territory," Owen laughed. "That's hardly true." "But even if it were, it wouldn't matter." His expression grew serious. "Do you know what I thought when I first saw you sitting on that bench in town?" Tabitha shook her head. "I thought, there's a woman who doesn't know her own worth, and I wanted to be the one to show it to you." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm not asking for anything, Tabitha. I just want you to know that to me you're beautiful, inside and out." Tabitha's heart felt too full for words. She squeezed his hand, hoping he would understand what she couldn't say. The next morning, Tabitha awoke to the sound of raised voices. She dressed quickly and went to the kitchen, where Mrs. Davenport was arguing with a man Tabitha recognized as Milton Perkins, the town clerk. "What's happening?" Tabitha asked. Both turned to look at her. Perkins held a piece of paper in his hand. "Miss Morgan," he said with false politeness. "Just the person I'm looking for. Mr. Perkins has brought some ridiculous nonsense from Crawford," Mrs. Davenport explained, her voice tight with anger. "Owen's already gone out to the west pasture. I've sent Billy to fetch him." "What does Mr. Crawford want?" Tabitha asked, a sense of dread building in her stomach. Perkins cleared his throat. "Mr. Crawford has filed a complaint with the territorial court. He claims that you entered into a contract with him by accepting his proposal and traveling west. He's demanding either the fulfillment of that contract or financial compensation for breach of contract." Tabitha stared at him in disbelief. "But he rejected me. He sent me away." "He claims there was a misunderstanding," Perkins said, "and that you subsequently took employment with his business rival in an act of spite." "That's absurd," Mrs. Davenport snapped. "The girl needed work. Owen gave her a job. There's no law against that." "Nevertheless," Perkins continued, "the judge has agreed to hear the case next week. Until then, Miss Morgan is ordered to refrain from any activities that could be construed as furthering Mr. Reed's business interests." "You mean I can't work?" Tabitha asked, incredulous. "Not on the ranch accounts, no," Perkins said. "Domestic duties are permitted." The sound of galloping hooves announced Owen's arrival. He burst through the door, his face thunderous. "What's this about Crawford filing a complaint?" he demanded. Perkins repeated his explanation, seeming to shrink under Owen's glare. "This is harassment, pure and simple," Owen said when Perkins finished. "Crawford's angry because his men couldn't intimidate us yesterday, so he's trying another tactic." "The law is the law, Mr. Reed," Perkins said weakly. "The law says a woman can't be forced to marry against her will," Owen countered. "Crawford has no case, and you know it." "That's for the judge to decide," Perkins said, backing toward the door. "Good day to you all." After he left, Owen turned to Tabitha, his expression softening. "I'm sorry about this. Crawford's just trying to cause trouble." "What if the judge sides with him?" Tabitha asked, fear evident in her voice. Owen took her hands in his. "He won't. But even if he did, I wouldn't let anyone force you to do anything you don't want to do." He smiled reassuringly. "Besides, Crawford doesn't really want to marry you. He just wants to hurt me by taking away something he thinks is mine." Tabitha's eyes widened at his words. "Is that what I am? Yours?" Owen's smile faltered. "No, of course not. That came out wrong." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "What I meant was, Crawford sees you working here as a slight against him. He thinks you chose me over him, and his pride can't handle it." "But I did choose you," Tabitha said softly. "You were kind when everyone else was cruel. You saw value in me when no one else did." The intensity in Owen's eyes made her breath catch. "Tabitha," Mrs. Davenport cleared her throat loudly. "I believe I'll go gather some eggs," she announced to no one in particular, and hurried outside. Alone in the kitchen, Owen and Tabitha stood facing each other, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. "I don't want Crawford or anyone else telling you what you can or can't do," Owen said finally. "But I need you to know that whatever happens with this ridiculous case, you have a place here for as long as you want it." "Thank you," Tabitha said, touched by his words. "But I won't let Crawford use me to hurt you or the ranch." "Let me worry about Crawford," Owen said. "You just keep being the amazing woman you are." The day of the hearing arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, a stark contrast to the storm of nerves in Tabitha's stomach. She wore her best dress, a deep blue that Mrs. Davenport had helped her alter to fit properly. "You look lovely," Owen said when she came downstairs. He was dressed in his Sunday best, a clean white shirt, dark vest, and polished boots. "So do you," Tabitha replied, trying to smile despite her anxiety. The hearing was held in the town hall, with most of Silver Creek's residents in attendance. Judge Parker, a stern-faced man with bushy white eyebrows, presided from behind a makeshift bench. Victor Crawford sat at one table with a slick-looking lawyer from Helena. Owen and Tabitha sat at another with no legal representation. "Don't you need a lawyer?" Tabitha had asked on the ride into town. Owen had shaken his head. "The truth is on our side. Besides, I've known Judge Parker for years. He's fair." The proceedings began with Crawford's lawyer presenting their case. He painted Crawford as a respectable businessman who had been deceived by Tabitha's false representations of herself, then humiliated when she took up with his competitor. Mr. Crawford entered into good faith negotiations for marriage, the lawyer argued. He arranged for Miss Morgan's travel west, secured accommodations for her arrival, and planned for their future together. All of this represents a significant investment of time and resources. Judge Parker turned to Crawford. "Mr. Crawford, is it true that upon Miss Morgan's arrival, you rejected her and arranged for only one night's lodging at the hotel?" Crawford shifted uncomfortably. "There was a misunderstanding. I had certain expectations based on our correspondence." "You mean you expected a pretty face," the judge said bluntly. "And when Miss Morgan didn't meet your standards in that regard, you abandoned her in a strange town with nowhere to go." "I provided accommodations," Crawford protested. "For one night," the judge reminded him. "And then what was she to do?" Crawford had no answer. Judge Parker turned to Tabitha. "Miss Morgan, did you intentionally deceive Mr. Crawford about your appearance?" Tabitha stood, her knees trembling slightly. "I sent a photograph of my cousin with one of my letters," she admitted. "But in my final letter before traveling west, I explained the deception and provided a true description of myself. Mr. Crawford claims he never received that letter." "I did not," Crawford insisted. "Your Honor," Owen interjected, standing beside Tabitha. "May I speak?" The judge nodded. "I've known Victor Crawford for 10 years, Owen said. "In that time, I've never known him to be honest in his business dealings or personal affairs. He's trying to use this court to harass Miss Morgan and, by extension, me, because of our long-standing land dispute." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Judge Parker banged his gavel for silence. "Mr. Crawford," the judge said, "do you have any evidence that Miss Morgan entered into a legally binding contract with you?" Crawford's lawyer shuffled through his papers. "We have the letters discussing the possibility of marriage are not a contract," the judge interrupted. "Do you have anything else?" The lawyer conferred briefly with Crawford, then shook his head. Judge Parker stroked his beard thoughtfully. "It seems to me, Mr. Crawford, that you're asking this court to force a woman to marry you against her will, based on a correspondence that you yourself terminated upon meeting her. Is that correct?" Crawford's face reddened. "I'm asking for compensation for my expenses and the damage to my reputation." "Your reputation," the judge repeated. "From what I understand, you're the one who publicly humiliated Miss Morgan. If anyone's reputation has been damaged, it's hers." He shuffled his papers. "Case dismissed. Miss Morgan is free to work wherever she chooses." The courtroom erupted in conversation. Crawford stormed out, his lawyer hurrying after him. Tabitha stood in shock, relief washing over her. "It's over," Owen said, taking her hand. "He can't bother you anymore." Outside the town hall, several townspeople approached Tabitha to offer their congratulations. To her surprise, many of them were women who had previously ignored her or turned her away when she was looking for work. "Crawford's never been popular with the ladies of Silver Creek," Mrs. Halloway explained when she came up to Tabitha. too full of himself by half. "We're glad to see him taken down a peg." As they prepared to leave town, a commotion near the saloon caught their attention. Crawford, clearly drunk despite the early hour, was shouting at anyone who would listen. "This isn't over, Reed," he called when he spotted Owen and Tabitha. "You think you've won, but I'll ruin you yet." Owen helped Tabitha into the wagon. "Ignore him," he advised. "He's all bluster." But as they drove out of town, Tabitha couldn't shake the feeling that Crawford's threats weren't empty. The look in his eyes had been one of pure hatred. The next few weeks passed peacefully at the Double R. Tabitha resumed her work on the ranch accounts and continued her riding lessons with Owen. The confrontation with Crawford faded from immediate concern, though Owen increased the night watches around the ranch as a precaution. One evening, as Tabitha and Owen sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to her with an unusually serious expression. "There's something I need to ask you," he said. Tabitha's heart quickened. "Yes, the cattle drive to Billings starts next week," Owen explained. "I'll be gone for about 3 weeks. Would you be willing to take full charge of the ranch accounts while I'm away? Mrs. Davenport can handle the household, but someone needs to manage the payroll and supplies." Though not what she had hoped he might ask, Tabitha was touched by his trust. "Of course, I'd be happy to help." "Thank you," Owen said, relief evident in his voice. "I wouldn't trust anyone else with it." "You'll be careful on the drive?" Tabitha asked, unable to hide her concern. Owen smiled. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I'll be fine." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "But it's nice to know someone will be worrying about me." The morning of the cattle drive's departure was organized chaos. The hands were excited, the cattle restless, and Mrs. Davenport was frantically packing food for the journey. Tabitha helped where she could, trying not to think about how empty the ranch would feel with Owen and most of the hands gone. As the men prepared to leave, Owen sought out Tabitha. She was in the barn, checking the supplies one last time. "Tabitha," he called softly. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, backlit by the morning sun. He looked every inch the capable rancher, strong and confident. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," he said, walking toward her. 3 weeks isn't so long," Tabitha said, trying to sound cheerful. "It feels like an eternity right now," Owen admitted, stopping in front of her. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll miss you every day." Tabitha's breath caught. "Owen." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Tabitha had no desire to retreat. She lifted her face to his, and their lips met in a gentle kiss that quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for a long time," he confessed. "So have I," Tabitha whispered. "When I get back," Owen promised, "we'll talk about the future, our future if you want that." "I do," Tabitha said, her heart overflowing with happiness. "More than anything." The sound of the men calling for Owen broke the moment. He kissed her once more, quickly but tenderly, then reluctantly pulled away. "Take care of our home," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I will," Tabitha promised. "Come back to me safely." She stood in the yard with Mrs. Davenport, waving until Owen and the cattle drive disappeared over the distant hill. "Well," Mrs. Davenport said, wiping a tear from her eye, "it's just us women for a while. We'll manage just fine." The first week without Owen passed uneventfully. Tabitha threw herself into her work, keeping the ranch books meticulously and helping Mrs. Davenport with household tasks. The two women had grown close, and in the evenings they sat by the fire, with Mrs. Davenport sharing stories of the early days at the Double R. "Owen built this place from nothing," she told Tabitha one night. "Came out here with just a dream and the clothes on his back. Everyone said he'd fail, that the land was too harsh, but he proved them wrong. He's a remarkable man, Tabitha agreed, her fingers tracing the pattern on her teacup. Mrs. Davenport smiled knowingly. And he thinks you're a remarkable woman. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Tabitha blushed but couldn't suppress her smile. Before I came here, I never thought anyone would see past. She gestured at her face. Beauty isn't just about features, child, Mrs. Davenport said gently. It's about who you are inside. Owen sees the real you, that's rare and precious. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Both women looked up, startled. It was too late for casual visitors, and all but two of the hands were with Owen on the cattle drive. "Stay here," Mrs. Davenport said, reaching for the shotgun Owen kept by the door. "I'll see who it is." Before she could reach the door, it burst open. 3 men stormed in, their faces concealed by bandanas. One held a gun on Mrs. Davenport, while another grabbed Tabitha roughly by the arm. "Don't make a sound," he warned, his voice muffled by the bandana. The third man, clearly the leader, surveyed the room. "Where's the strong box?" he demanded. "We don't keep money in the house," Mrs. Davenport said defiantly. "You're wasting your time." The leader backhanded her, sending the older woman sprawling to the floor. Tabitha cried out and tried to go to her, but the man holding her tightened his grip painfully. "I know Reed keeps his cash somewhere," the leader insisted. "And you're going to tell me where, or things will get a lot worse for both of you." There was something familiar about his voice, though Tabitha couldn't place it through the distortion of the bandana. "The office," she said quickly, hoping to spare Mrs. Davenport further harm. "There's a safe behind the bookshelf." The leader nodded to the third man, who went to the office. Minutes later, he returned with Owen's cash box. "Got it," he announced. "About $200, boss." "Not enough," the leader growled. He turned to Tabitha. "Where's the rest?" "That's all there is," Tabitha insisted. "Most of the ranch's money is in the bank in Silver Creek." The leader stared at her for a long moment, then suddenly ripped off his bandana. Tabitha gasped as Victor Crawford's face was revealed. "You're lying," he said, his eyes wild with anger and alcohol. "Reed wouldn't leave his precious ranch with just $200 on hand, not with a cattle drive underway." "Mr. Crawford," Tabitha said, trying to keep her voice steady, "please take the money and go. No one needs to get hurt." Crawford laughed, an ugly sound. "Oh, someone's going to get hurt, all right. Reed took what was mine, now I'm taking what's his." With horror, Tabitha realized he was talking about her. "You didn't want me," she reminded him. "You sent me away." "That's not the point," Crawford shouted. "You were supposed to be mine, and Reed stole you, just like he's trying to steal my water rights." The man holding Tabitha tightened his grip. "What do you want us to do with them, boss?" Crawford considered for a moment. "Tie up the old woman. The mail-order bride comes with us. Reed will pay a handsome ransom to get her back." Mrs. Davenport, who had been quietly pulling herself up, suddenly lunged for the shotgun. One of Crawford's men kicked it away, but the distraction gave Tabitha the opportunity she needed. She stomped hard on her captor's foot and twisted out of his grip. "Run, Tabitha," Mrs. Davenport shouted. Tabitha darted for the back door, but Crawford was faster. He caught her by the hair and yanked her back, pressing a knife to her throat. "Enough games," he snarled. "You're coming with us one way or another." Suddenly, the sound of a rifle being cocked echoed through the room. Everyone froze. "Let her go, Crawford," a familiar voice commanded. Tabitha turned her head slightly to see Billy, one of the ranch hands left behind during the cattle drive, standing in the doorway with a rifle aimed at Crawford's head. Behind him was the second hand, Tom, similarly armed. Crawford's grip on Tabitha tightened. "Back off, boy, or I'll cut her." "You'll be dead before your blade breaks skin," Billy said calmly. I was the best shot in my regiment during the war. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Crawford slowly lowered his knife. "This isn't worth dying for," he muttered, shoving Tabitha away from him. Billy and Tom quickly disarmed Crawford and his men, binding their hands with rope. "Are you all right, Miss Morgan?" Billy asked, his young face creased with concern. "Yes," Tabitha said, though she was shaking. "Thank you." "How did you know to come?" "Mrs. Davenport and I worked out a signal," Billy explained. "If there was trouble, she was to light the lantern in the east window. When I saw it, I fetched Tom and we came as quick as we could." Tabitha went to Mrs. Davenport, who was sitting in a chair looking pale but determined. "You're hurt," she said, noticing the bruise forming on the older woman's cheek. "I've had worse," Mrs. Davenport said dismissively. "What matters is that we're all safe." She glared at Crawford. "And this snake is going to jail where he belongs." Early the next morning, Billy rode to Silver Creek with Crawford and his men tied securely to their horses. The sheriff, a gruff but honest man named Hank Wilson, was shocked by Crawford's actions. "I always knew he was a bitter man," Sheriff Wilson told Tabitha when he came to take her statement, "but I never thought he'd resort to this kind of violence." "What will happen to him?" Tabitha asked. "He'll stand trial for assault, attempted kidnapping, and robbery," the sheriff said. "With all the witnesses, he's likely to spend a good long while in territorial prison." The sheriff's visit was not the only one the Double R received that day. By afternoon, word had spread through the county about Crawford's attack, and several neighboring ranchers rode over to offer assistance. Mrs. Wilson from the dress shop even came, bringing salve for Mrs. Davenport's bruises and an unexpected apology for Tabitha. "I was unkind to you when you first came to town," she admitted. "I listened to gossip instead of judging for myself. I'm sorry for that." "Thank you," Tabitha said, genuinely touched by the woman's words. That evening, as Tabitha sat on the porch watching the sunset, she reflected on how much her life had changed since coming to Montana. She had arrived feeling unwanted and unworthy, convinced that no one could ever truly care for her. Now she had friends, respect, and a man who saw her beauty when she couldn't see it herself. A distant rider appeared on the horizon, galloping hard toward the ranch. Tabitha stood, shading her eyes against the setting sun. As the rider drew closer, her heart began to race. She would know that silhouette anywhere. "Owen," she called, running down the porch steps. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward her with purpose. "Are you all right?" he demanded, his hands gently grasping her shoulders as his eyes searched her face for any sign of injury. "When I got Sheriff Wilson's message, I rode day and night to get back." "I'm fine," Tabitha assured him, unable to stop the tears of relief that sprang to her eyes. "We all are. Billy and Tom saved us." Owen pulled her into a fierce embrace. "I should never have left you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If anything had happened to you, but nothing did," Tabitha interrupted, pulling back to look at him. "We're safe. Crawford is in jail." Owen touched her face gently, as if reassuring himself that she was really there and unharmed. "When I got that message, I realized something, Tabitha. I realized that I can live without this ranch, without my cattle, without everything I've built, but I cannot live without you." Tabitha's breath caught. "Owen, I love you," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since that first day in town, when you sat on that bench with your head held high despite everything Crawford had done." "I love you too," Tabitha whispered, joy spreading through her like sunlight. Owen smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way that always made her heart flutter. "I had a whole speech planned for when I got back from the cattle drive," he admitted. "Something poetic about how you've changed my life and made the ranch feel like a real home for the first time." "It's still a good speech," Tabitha said, smiling through her tears, Owen laughed, then grew serious again. Tabitha Morgan, will you marry me? Not because you need a husband or I need a wife, but because we belong together. Yes, Tabitha said without hesitation. With all my heart, yes. Their kiss was a promise of love, of acceptance, of a future together that neither had dared to imagine before finding each other. The wedding took place 2 months later, on a perfect autumn day with the mountains blazing with fall colors. The entire town of Silver Creek seemed to attend, along with ranchers from miles around. The church was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, and Tabitha wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Wilson had insisted on making for her as a wedding gift. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Davenport said as she helped Tabitha with the final touches. "Owen won't know what hit him." "Do I?" Tabitha asked, studying her reflection in the small mirror. The dress was lovely. Her hair was arranged in an elegant style, but her face was still her face, the prominent nose, the freckles, the scar above her eyebrow. "You've always been beautiful, child," Mrs. Davenport said gently. "Not in the way those fashion plates in magazines are beautiful, but in a real way that matters. And today, with love shining in your eyes, you're magnificent." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Tabitha walked down the aisle, she saw only Owen, waiting for her with a look of such love and pride that her doubts melted away. This man saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he saw. "I never thought I'd find you," Owen said when it came time for their vows. "I'd resigned myself to a life alone, running my ranch and reading my books. Then you arrived in Silver Creek, and suddenly the world was full of possibilities I'd never dared to imagine. You are the only beauty I need in my life, Tabitha Morgan, and I promise to spend every day showing you just how precious you are to me." Tabitha's voice shook with emotion as she spoke her own vows. "You found me when I was lost, Owen Reed. You gave me a home when I had none, and you showed me that I was worthy of love just as I am. I promise to stand by your side through whatever life brings, to be your partner in all things, and to love you with all that I am for all of my days." The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than Tabitha had ever seen in one place. As the newlyweds shared their first dance, Owen leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Happy, Mrs. Reed." Tabitha looked up at her husband, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she said truthfully. Later, as they said goodbye to their guests and prepared to begin their married life together, Tabitha caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window of the ranch house. She saw not the ugly, mail-order bride who had arrived in Silver Creek 6 months ago, but a woman transformed by love and acceptance standing tall beside the man who had helped her discover her own worth. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Tabitha leaned back against him, savoring the strength and warmth of his embrace. "I was thinking about how far I've come," she said, "and how grateful I am that Victor Crawford rejected me that day." Owen laughed, turning her in his arms to face him. "His loss is definitely my gain," he said, kissing her tenderly. "But I think we've given enough thought to Victor Crawford." "You're right," Tabitha agreed, smiling up at the man who had changed her life. "The past is behind us. Our future is what matters now." 5 years later, Tabitha sat on the porch of the Double R, watching as Owen taught their 4-year-old daughter, Emily, to ride her pony. The little girl's laughter carried across the yard, a sound that never failed to fill Tabitha's heart with joy. So much had changed since that first day in Silver Creek. The Double R had prospered under their joint management, expanding its operations and gaining a reputation as one of the best-run ranches in the territory. The house had grown too, with a new wing added to accommodate their growing family. Emily had a 2-year-old brother, James, who was currently napping inside under Mrs. Davenport's watchful eye. Victor Crawford had served 3 years in territorial prison before being released. He had sold his ranch and moved east, much to everyone's relief. In his absence, Silver Creek had flourished, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the area. Tabitha herself had changed as well. Not in her appearance, she still had the same features that had once caused her so much pain, but in how she carried herself. The uncertain, apologetic woman who had stepped off the train was gone, replaced by someone who moved through the world with confidence and purpose. Owen looked up from his lesson with Emily and caught Tabitha watching them. He smiled, that same smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. Leaving Emily in the care of one of the ranch hands, he walked over to join his wife on the porch. "What's that look for?" he asked, sitting beside her on the swing. "Just counting my blessings," Tabitha said, leaning against his shoulder. Owen kissed the top of her head. "Funny, I was doing the same thing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Happy anniversary, my love." Tabitha took the package with surprise. "But our anniversary isn't until next week." "I know," Owen said with a mischievous smile, "but I couldn't wait. Open it." Tabitha carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she found it filled with handwritten poems and sketches all in Owen's hand. "You wrote these?" she asked, turning the pages with wonder. "One for each month since we met," Owen explained. "I'm no poet, but I wanted to give you something that showed how much joy you've brought into my life." Tabitha traced her fingers over a sketch of herself sitting at the kitchen table, laughing at something beyond the frame. It was how Owen saw her, beautiful, vibrant, full of life. "This is the most precious gift anyone has ever given me," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you." Owen took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher all those years ago, for seeing something in me worth loving." "It wasn't hard," Tabitha said softly. "You were the only one who ever really saw me." Emily came running up the porch steps, her small face alight with excitement. "Mama, did you see me riding, all by myself?" "I did, sweetheart," Tabitha said, gathering her daughter onto her lap. "You were wonderful." As the three of them sat together on the porch swing, watching the sun begin its descent behind the mountains, Tabitha reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. Had Crawford not rejected her that day at the train station, had Owen not found her on that bench, her life would have taken a very different path. "Penny for your thoughts," Owen said, noticing her contemplative expression. Tabitha smiled, looking from her husband to her daughter, then out at the ranch that had become her home. "I was just thinking that sometimes the things that seem like our greatest disappointments can lead us to our greatest joys." Owen squeezed her hand, understanding in his eyes. "The only beauty I need," he said softly, repeating the words he had spoken to her so many times over the years. And in that moment, surrounded by the family and the life they had built together, Tabitha knew with absolute certainty that she was indeed beautiful, not because of how she looked, but because of how she was loved.